Are we just a ghost in a shell? Is there some kind of immaterial mind that is different from the brain inside of us? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. Now, there are several mind-body problems, but the main one, and the one that we're most interested in this playlist, is, do I have a mind that is different than, distinct from my brain? And in the last several videos, we've looked at materialist views of mind. Today, we're going to look at dualism. What is dualism? The trouble with talking about dualism is that there is an ambiguity in talking about it. People use that word to mean two different things. So, let's sort of separate those two. And actually on this playlist, I've used it in one particular way, and hopefully it hasn't caused any confusion. But yeah, let's look at the different ways. So the first thing we can do is look at the different possible solutions to the mind-body problem. Do I have a mind that's different from my brain? The first possibility is materialism, and that would say that only the brain exists, the mind doesn't exist at all, right? So things like dendrites, right? That's the kind of stuff, neurons, they exist. However, thoughts, emotions, those things don't exist. Or there's just some way of talking about the neurons that actually exist, but they don't really exist. And that's a position we call materialism. The second possibility we have is to say that only the mind exists. I'm thinking specifically of the philosopher George Berkeley here, who would say that, the only thing we have access to is our mind. We have access to the sensations and the perceptions that we have, but we don't have access to the material world. Well, why believe there is a material world behind all our sensations? So he believed that there was no such thing as matter. There's no material brain there. There's just the mind, and that's it. Going any further and positing a thing called matter would be against Occam's razor. A third possibility we could have is to say that neither one of them exists. And this would be something like the Maya answer, that everything is an illusion, right? The existence of the material brain and the existence of an immaterial self are both an illusion, and either some third thing exists, like Brahman, or nothing exists. It's tough to take the latter claim seriously, although there have been people that have believed that. And the former claim sounds like it's going to be positing the existence of a mind somewhere, right? Maybe it won't be our minds, but it'll be some mind. The final possibility would be to say that they both exist, and this is what we would call dualism. And this is what we'll call dualism in the broad sense. Dualism, including all kinds of different theories on how these two things work together, and including all kinds of theories on exactly what kind of existence the mind has. So this could be very, very non-committal about what the mind is like. It could just say that so long as something material exists and something immaterial exists in your philosophy of mind, then you're a dualist. That would be the meaning of this term. But again, you can be really, really minimalist about your dualism. So there's a distinction between what are called substance dualists and property dualists. Property dualists will say that the mind is just a collection of mental properties, so stuff like thoughts or feelings and stuff like that, that are had by the brain. So, for example, imagine I had the thought, Grizzly Adams had a beard. And imagine that the brain works this way, and it absolutely does not work this way, but imagine for every thought is assigned one neuron. Now, the thing about all these neurons is that they all have different properties. So they have the properties of 100 microns. I definitely did not have to look that up just off the top of my head. They are all slimy, and they are all gray. I'm not even sure about that last one, by the way. I just remember from that song on Oingo Boingo, gray matter. Gray matter, gray matter. I assume that they're gray because there's that song. So it has those properties. Slimy, gray, 100 microns. This thought is just another property that it has, right? It just another property to throw onto the pile. That would be a property dualist. And what's nice about property dualism is it only asks you to really believe in one kind of a substance, material substances, and then we could just throw on as many properties as we want to. Although that is kind of weird to say that a material thing has an immaterial property like that. And so we'll talk about the the arguments for and against property dualism in a few videos coming up. The nemesis of the property dualists are the substance dualists. So the substance dualists believe that the mind and the brain are two different substances, right? They're two different things. And thoughts and feelings and choices and things like that, they all are properties that belong to the mind substance, not just to the brain substance. Now, if you're a substance dualist, you actually have a number of different options as well. So the first one would be hylomorphism. Hylomorphism was famously espoused by Aristotle and taken up by Thomas Aquinas. And it says something to the effect that the mind and the brain are just components of the whole thing, the person. So the mind is sort of like part of the form of the person, and the form causes the material of the person to be what the thing is. So the mind as part of the form is making the brain to be the kind of a thing that it is. So in this sense, the mind and the brain are a composite. The brain couldn't exist without the mind, or couldn't be a human brain without the mind being in there. It would just be a corpse's brain or something like that. And the mind could possibly exist outside of the brain, but that would take a little bit more argumentation to show. Emergentists, in contrast, think that the brain and the mind are two separable things, but they believe that the mind emerges from the brain. And there are a number of great illustrations. John Searle gives one good one, sort of like a projector and a projected image, and the mind being the projected image and the brain being the projector. And notice how the projection is totally dependent upon the projector. So it's a real thing that comes into existence, and yet it is totally caused by the projector. And possibly it could continue to exist. John Searle doesn't believe that, but possibly it could continue to exist without the projector, but possibly not. And then you finally have Cartesian duelists. The word Cartesian referring to René Descartes. I know it's kind of weird, Cartesian, Descartes, but yeah, Descartes, which should be like Descartesian? I don't know, but Cartesian. And they believe that the mind and the brain are two totally separate things, and they can be connected by some kind of causal connection, but they are totally separate. And the thing is, in many cases, when people say dualism, this is what they are saying. This is what they're talking about. I'll talk about all three of these positions, by the way, in many videos down the road. First, we'll talk about property versus substance dualism. But it gets confusing because guys like me, and to throw all my cards out on the table, I'm a hylomorphist. Guys like me will say, I'm not a dualist. And what I mean is I'm not a Cartesian dualist. I don't mean that I'm not a dualist in the broad sense. But to be honest, I think the word dualist probably applies in the broader sense more accurately than this Cartesian dualist sense. So I don't know. It's confusing. I apologize. I think in fact, I know in this playlist that I've used the word to mean Cartesian dualist. So apologies. Now, what I'll do is I'll give you some reasons why you might be a dualist and some reasons why you might not want to be a dualist. And these are not arguments for dualism or arguments against dualism. If you're looking for arguments for dualism, what you can do is look in this playlist for any of the objections to materialism. Now, the problem with that is that those objections to materialism don't prove dualism per se. They prove dualism or the George Berkeley's idea that we are just minds, or the idea that neither brain nor mind exists for real. But I don't know. Typically, dualism is the option if you're not going to be a materialist. And maybe I'll make a video. I have some good arguments, I think, for dualism in contradistinction to the other two. But in any case, if you want to look at arguments for or against dualism, you can almost take the arguments for and against materialism and just apply them oppositely. So why would you want to be a dualist? Well, one reason might be because it seems like the mind is the seat of personhood, and that the body cannot be the seat of personhood. What do I mean by that? The body is a thing that is constantly changing and constantly gaining and losing parts. Every 7 years, it's supposed to be the case that you have all your cells have died and been replaced by new cells. except for the brain. And in the brain, even there, you've had new electrons coming in, and even then your neurons have changed in somewhat new neural pathways, blood, different kinds of things have changed in your brain. So you're constantly changing as a physical material being, and yet you're still you, right? You're still who you are. So what is it that remains the same through all the changes that your body has? It seems like that's going to have to be something that is not the body. It seems like it's going to have to be the mind. Or another way to support this claim is to say something like that personhood does not come in quantity, but material comes in quantity, right? Material objects come in quantity. So my body might weigh 210 pounds. You cut off my leg, all of a sudden my body weighs 70 pounds, something. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm less of a person, right? I haven't lost 30 pounds of personhood. I've lost 30 pounds of material. So it seems like my personhood is tied up to something that is not my body. There are things about my body that are important to my personhood, but that's not where it ends. That's not where the identity resides. Second, you might be convinced that thinking seems like an immaterial thing to do. Imagine opening up somebody's head and looking inside and looking at that brain working, and oh, look, there's a dendrite there, and there's a neuron over there, there's a pathway, and you see all these different things going on. Do you ever see a thought? Do you ever see an experience? It seems like the kinds of things that go on in our mind are not physical things. Otherwise, your brain would turn into those physical things, right? Like I have a picture of a car in my mind right now. Is there a material car in my brain? No. So it seems like thoughts are immaterial things, even if they're connected to the material thing of the brain in some way. Another reason you might be a dualist is because you might have a sense that we have some kind of transcendence to us, right? That we just have a sense that we're more than our bodies. I'm not really sure what to make of this one. I kind of feel like I do have that sense, but then I also feel like I do have the sense that I am my body, right? Like I feel like I have a sense that I'm my body. Like if you were to hit me, you're hitting me. You're not hitting just something that my soul is using or something like that. But I also have the sense that if I were to lose my body and somehow I could survive, I'm assuming that I could survive that, it seems like I have the sense that I could survive that, and that I would still be who I am. So I don't know. I don't know how good of a philosophical reason that is, but that's the reason why a lot of people will be dualists, is because they have that sense. The fourth reason is religious. Some philosophers believe in a religion that claims that we have souls that are eternal, usually that are eternal. And although some of them don't believe that we have souls that are eternal, which is interesting. I don't know. It's kind of like, what's the point then? But interestingly enough, I don't necessarily think this is a bad reason. And here's what I mean. If you want to know more about this, by the way, you can check out my video on faith and knowledge. But a religion could, at least theoretically, provide reasons to believe that it's a true religion. And if it's a true religion and it says the soul is real, that there is a mind that's separate from the brain, then that should be a datum to be explained rather than something to be proved. So you can start there, assuming that the religion has proven itself trustworthy in some way. Now, this isn't to say that all philosophers that believe in a soul because of their religion are justified in believing in a soul. No, again, this would be a case-by-case basis. Does your religion provide sufficient evidence to show that it's true? And only then can we go and say, well, does it say that there's a soul? And it's possible that no religions do that, and it's possible that one religion does that. Though I don't think it could be possible that more than one does that, because they typically have contradictory claims, so they can't both be true at the same time. Okay, so those are reasons why you might be a dualist. Here's some reasons why you might not want to be a dualist, why you might reject dualism. First, it makes us sound like ghosts in a shell, right? It makes it sound like we are just these ghostly beings that are using a body, and that sure doesn't feel like what it's like, like it sounds like you're possessing the body, And if that's the case, like, could you go and possess a toaster too? You know, my soul could just do whatever the heck it wants to. That seems weird. So one thing is it seems mysterious, kind of like how can the soul inhabit a body, use a body? A second reason might be that you think the neuroscience explains everything. Now, you wouldn't say that neuroscience explains everything because it hasn't explained everything just yet. Nobody believes that. But you would say that neuroscience has explained enough that you're convinced that it'll explain all the rest, which, by the way, is a presupposition. Okay, so that's not a scientific view. That is, you're coming to the table with this already presupposed. But that might be something that's attractive to you, so you might go with that. Another reason you might reject dualism is because mind sounds like soul and soul sounds like religion, right? So you might just think, I'm done with religions. No, I don't want to believe that there's a soul. Now, interestingly, I don't think this is a good reason. You know, before I said that it's possible for a religion to show good evidence that it's true, and therefore the things that it says is true. But the same wouldn't apply here, right? The absence of religion can't show good evidence that it's true, and therefore that the things that it says is true, right? It might be the case that there is good evidence that there is no religion that's true, sure. But then there's no like, okay, and now there's this book here that the absence of religion says that there is no soul, you know, that there's no mind or something like that. That at that point, there's no claims that are made further, you know, so you couldn't go from religions are false to go to saying, therefore, that there's no mind or there's no soul. There still might be a soul, even though religions are false. And finally, you might reject dualism because you believe in scientism, which is a view that says that the only things that we can believe in or that we can know or that exist are things that we can discover scientifically. And this is almost certainly a false view. What do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, there's no reason for us to believe that everything that exists we have scientific access to, you know? Like, there's no reason for us to think that we will be. In fact, we know that if we had come along a little bit later in the timeline, we would have no way to see outside of our own galaxy. We would think that our galaxy is the only thing, right? We would have no scientific way of showing that the Big Bang was true. So, of course, you know, like, there could be things that are out there that we just can't show scientifically. Why is that surprising? We're limited beings with limited resources. Okay, no big deal. But secondly, there are things we clearly know that we haven't derived from the scientific method. For example, the laws of logic. The laws of logic are presupposed by science, and yet we didn't go out and investigate, you know, we didn't do any experiments to find the laws of logic. So there are things that we know that are not scientifically discovered. So then why is this such an attractive view? Well, I think it's because science has results, and philosophy in principle can't give those same kinds of results. So it looks like philosophy might be a fruitless endeavor. But that's only because philosophy isn't built for the same kinds of results. Philosophy has a different methodology, it has a different subject matter, right? Different thing that it studies. So we should expect it to come out with a different product, a different kind of knowledge than we would expect from the scientific method, right? It's studying something totally different way, by a totally different means. So just because they don't come out with the same thing doesn't mean that one is knowledge and the other one is not. And yet scientism remains very attractive for certain people, so they will reject dualism because of it. So there's my overview of dualism. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. In videos to come, I'll be talking about the difference between property and substance dualism and the different kinds of dualism. And hope to see you in those videos. And that's all for this one. Adios.